love for us to move on to our conversation on today's big hard fact, and for that I have a huge question. How can Lagos improve its livability score? How can Lagos improve its livability score? I'm referring to the Global Cities Livability Index, published at least once a year by the Economist Intelligence Unit (EIU). It brings me to our big hard fact for today. Lagos ranked 171st out of 172 cities on the EIU's Livability Index, scoring 32.2%. Now, apart from being a yardstick for the quality of life in the world's major cities, many multinational companies and agencies use the EIU Livability Index to set hardship pay. Some companies and countries may also use it when assessing whether a city is a good investment destination. So you can understand why some people think that government should be worried about a low score. But what can the government actually do to improve the livability index? And why is Lagos scoring so low in spite of having the highest IGR of any state in Nigeria? These are some of the questions that my guest today will try to answer. Well, she already tried to answer it in her latest article for Steers Business. She's deputy editor for Steers Business. Adeshola Afolabi, welcome to Hard Facts.
Hi, Sandra. Thank you for having me.
Good to have you on the show.
Likewise.
All right, Lagos, don't forget we're streaming live on Facebook, Nigeria Info 99.3. YouTube is Nigeria Info FM. And you can join the conversation via WhatsApp 080-959-75805. You can also tweet at us at Nigeria Info FM or simply give us a call. Our number is 0700-993-993 or 01465 7190. Now, I've talked a bit about why the EIU is important, Adeshola, but talk to us a bit more about why it's important. How do global businesses use it?
Okay, so similar to what you said, many businesses use it to, set things like hardship pay. But more importantly, it helps them to plan effectively for, the future, which can be very uncertain. So, the EIU is like a metric that enables businesses and firms, even governments, to be able to plan. It also helps them to, know what the state of affairs is compared to other large cities across the world. And if you're a serious government looking to attract, investment and capital that you cannot, raise yourself, these are metrics that you need to start taking seriously because international institutions and businesses across the world use this as a parameter for what their futures will look like if they, venture into certain cities across the world.
Your article gives an interesting stat. Lagos has the second highest per capita capex spending of all states. That means that our capital expenditure per citizen is the second highest. On paper, this sounds great because it means that compared to other states, the amount of money Lagos is putting into infrastructure, schools, all of that will impact each Lagosian more. But we're not feeling that impact. How come, Adeshola?
Like you said, this is a very interesting start because I did expect it to even be like the highest, not like even the second highest. I expected like capital expenditure to be, high up there, similar to the income in terms of IGR, in terms of FAC, in terms of even the debts that we borrow. Because Lagos State borrows like quite a huge number of a huge amount of money to be able to fund infrastructure development. But to your question, why are we not feeling the impact? If you look at the value of the capital expenditure and you benchmark it with things like the GDP, which is how huge the economy of Lagos is, you see that that figure is still really minute. So even if Lagos is spending 2, 3, 4, 5 times higher on capex per capita than other states. When you compare it with this GDP, where the recommendation by the World Bank, I believe, is 5% of your GDP on infrastructure like schools, roads, electricity, essentially capital expenditure should be 5% of your GDP. But when you compare, as at the last time GDP figures were out, I believe that was 2016. When you compare capex that the state spent that year, was less than 1%.
Right.
And if you even look at the capital expenditure that year compared to like the latest figures, 2020, 2021, there has been very little growth in the capital being spent. So when you look at those figures, you see why it's actually very difficult for us or for Lagosians to feel the impact of the capital being spent on, either building roads, bridges, schools, hospitals, or, all of this infrastructure that we expect to help us live better lives in Lagos.
Which is interesting because Lagos currently spends about 52% of its budget on recurring expenditure. So while it's a no-brainer to say, government needs to reduce this figure and enable more capex, the question is how? What parts of Lagos government's OPEX can be cut?
Okay, so this cutting OPEX always seems like the reasonable thing to do. But personally, I'm not an advocate or not a fan of saying, okay, cut down operating expenses. Because when you look at operating expenses, they actually contain things like wages and salary, which is also very important too, because obviously people working what you classify as human capital. So that's also very important for the growth of any government or for governance to move forward. So the question here is like, how do we increase capital expenditure? How do we make sure that what we are borrowing or what we are earning is translated into higher capex, into higher funding for infrastructure? And that was why in the story I had to actually delve deeper into what exactly have we used borrowed funds for, because most times we try to say, okay, maybe the government can be a bit wasteful. Now that's left for the government to answer. But my point is operating expenses, which are majorly wages and salaries, are also very important. However, capex is something that most government needs to partner with, for example, the private sector, because sometimes it's not even just about cutting down. It doesn't have to be like 100. You can borrow and still fund, whereas your OPEX is still as high. So it's not a matter of cutting one to fund the other. They are very will I say, there are creative ways to be able to that government employs to fund this infrastructure. So, for example, I think in the story I also mentioned how you find private organizations or private firms like MTN, for example, providing infrastructure like the Lag Ferry, where they built this massive
cowrie house
carry house, at Ikoyi, where ships can park, boats. I mean, not ships, boats, and then people can take the water transportation between the island and then Ikorodu and every other place that water transportation can get to. So essentially, those are some examples of the kind of partnership that government needs to be doing. But the catch here is, if you even want to attract this kind of investment, you also have to show that you are willing and you have done all you can to make all of that infrastructure viable enough for these investments to come in. So you could have, for example, a ShopRite coming into Nigeria, but the road networks, or into Lagos, but the road networks connecting an Ikeja to Surulere, or the inner roads or the major roads are not are not properly built or are not maintained, even if they're built. And this is the work of state government. So if they are not spending, like I said, if they are not spending enough, if they are spending just less than 1% of the GDP on these roads or other infrastructure, for example, it's going to be very difficult for some of these private businesses to be comfortable enough to set up. That's just one example of like hardcore capital expenditure. In the story that we also published today, we talked about how things as simple as internet, making internet much more affordable, much more faster for people that even work and live in the States is very, very important for growth and development as well. And one of the examples we gave was Lagos State, how, the right of way charges is still one of the highest in the States, 1,500 compared to the federal government's 145 naira per liter per meter recommendation. So it's, when you look at things like this, it's sometimes it's just even policies. It's just policies that shows the government's willingness, to attract this kind of investments that can make people's lives
a bit easier, a bit better.
Yeah.
It's interesting that you mentioned private investment in infrastructure, especially through foreign investment. But there are limits to what type of infrastructure that private capital will invest in. It has to be monetizable. And that leads to two problems. So the first problem, the income base in Lagos, it's not great. So there's a limit to how much can be made quickly. Then secondly, long-term investments need stable, consistent policy, right? So with these limits in mind, what type of infrastructure investment can Lagos realistically attract? Realistically.
Okay, so yeah, this is a very deep question, but I'm just going to draw on residual knowledge to answer. So when you talk of realistically, I think some of the very pressing challenges in the States at the moment is, like I mentioned at the beginning of my story, is commuting. Just transporting yourself across Lagos is a nightmare, and I think that's like the top on most Lagosians that I've spoken to, that's like the top on their list.
Yeah.
And interestingly, Lagos did have a policy where it partnered with private organizations to roll out rapid transport systems, that's the BRT, bus system, I think sometime in 2008. And for some time it worked, and then it just wasn't, I don't know, I think the word to use it wasn't properly monitored. At the moment now, though, we have both the private sector.
Isn't that the story of our lives? The story, like if we were a book title or a movie title, it wasn't properly monitored. That would be the name.
I know, right? But you see, the issue here now is Lagos usually blames like most of these policy somersaults on the population is a bit too much. It's hard to manage. But I think the argument here is this same population is giving the state so much in terms of IGR. If you look at the taxes, people are paying, there's both the residents and then the income they can get from this population. You see that argument actually balances itself out, because these are the people that can give you the kind of leeway to be able to build on partnerships with private institutions. So if you have the private institution handling BRT at the moment, like I was explaining, I think it's Primero or what have you. But then when you look at policies in terms of expansion, in terms of also eradicating problematic transport systems, because there are some private transport that can be problematic, but essentially just regulating, for example, transportation in such a way that it's much more sane or much more coherent. I think it's not too much to ask the government to do. I don't want to. I think for a while now, the government has mentioned, it's, for example, eradicating some things like the yellow and black buses for a while now from the roads, because essentially when you have like a properly run private transport system, what you expect is a system where they are able to maintain their buses, they're able to pay taxes to the government, even from the revenue they're making, and they're able to sustain that kind of infrastructural development. You also look at things like rail, for example. Now, it's the government essentially that was supposed to run that, because they borrowed money from the capital market to be able to fund such huge, capital-intensive project. But from what we are hearing at the moment now, they're still having to, involve foreign investors that can come in and then, complete this project. Now, in terms of viability, it's going to be hard, because that's what we're seeing with current projects like the Lekki toll, for example. Now we know it started with the private sector, and then the government had to take over, and then now that they've taken over, they had to now start introducing a tool so that they can recoup those investments. But essentially, just like similar to what you were alluding, it's something that if it's a private sector, they want a situation whereby their policies that ensure that they get their monies in, a given amount of time. Not, so for example, 10 years, 20 years, they are sure that they will recoup
the money will come out.
Will come back. And then considering all other factors, think of inflation, think of how that erodes the value of capital over time. It can get very tricky to entice willing participants or willing foreign investors. But you see, that's the work of the government. A serious government would know how to, be creative with their policies and know how they can, essentially attract the kind of investment that they need in providing this infrastructure that is very important for livelihood in the state.
So say you were on a Lagos State Government Advisory Board, for instance, right? And they say, Adeshola, what can we do as the Lagos State Government to make Lagos an even more attractive FDI destination? What are some things that you would suggest?
Okay, so just like we've been saying, the first thing is the government needs to first show that it's even committed to the state, because like you said, you cannot you can't make progress if you're not showing someone that you yourself you're interested in progress. So first they need to improve. I'll first of all advise that I know this is a very tough situation or tough place to be at, but I'll first of all advise on improving capex spend, because at the moment we are not even spending as we should. We are not spending on things that we're supposed to be spending, because these are questions we need to ask. All of the money is borrowed. Where has it gone? What has it been used for? So we need to be more accountable. That's essentially what I am going to say. And when you can show that accountability, I think what most people don't realize is how much you can get by just being more accountable and transparent with how you spend the resources you have at the moment. So if you can provide that level of accountability and transparency, everybody knows that you also have, as a state government, you have like a lot at stake. You've put so much at stake, and then that shows your willingness to make things work. That alone is a signal to whatever foreign investor you're wooing, or whatever foreign institution, that, okay, coming here means I'm coming to work with a serious government. Also, when it comes to, there are some hindrances, for example, from the federal government in terms of developing certain areas that, could be problematic. I believe these are areas where, you can now iron it out at like different forums, but then the state needs to be one of, people at the forerunners mentioning issues, maybe at the NGF forums or whatever, that could hinder the ability for the state to move forward in certain infrastructural projects. Now, for example, what I have in mind when I mention things like this are the rail projects. If you check some of our stories on Stairs Business, so you see that we've written about the Lagos rail lines, which have been derailed for so long. And some of the reasons why they've not come to fruition is because they've not gotten some certain approvals from the federal government. And that's one reason why the state has said, okay, it's been delayed.
Mm.
So if you're bringing a foreign investor, for example, and then they are seeing issues like this, what they want to know is, what are we doing to fast track these problems, or what are we doing to solve
to
these
get around
problems?
this problem?
So that, yes, exactly, so that we can have progress. Because if you say, okay, come and bring your money, and then I'm seeing red flags like this, like essentially what's the workaround? Why should I come when I know that I don't even know if you get approvals, or if you'll be able to if I'll be able to essentially recoup my investments afterwards. So I think, also speaking on recouping investment, we essentially try to I think we belabor the fact of companies coming in, or businesses coming in and just paying tax immediately. I think most of what helps all of these companies to also come and stay is a bit of leeway, essentially when they come. So it's not all about, they come in and then we just, state or country getting income from these institutions. Because when they also come, what's happening, especially with infrastructure development, is lots of employment generation that happens when you're building roads. You see how it opens up essentially an economy. Or when you're building rail lines, you see different layers of economic activities that happen, from food making to carpentry, to what have you. So essentially it opens up employment opportunities for people. And I think if state governments take all of those activities into account, or if the state government like state Lagos takes all of those economic activities into account, there should be leeway for other policies or other income that they're expecting from these companies, that they should be able to negotiate a better
so
balance.
like tax holidays, for instance.
Essentially.
Okay, well, if you just tuned in, hello to you, Lagos. I'm Sandra Ezekwesili. I have the deputy editor for Steers Business on the show with me, Adeshola Afolabi. She wrote an article for Steers Business where she took a look at what government can do to improve Lagos's livability index. Now, why are we talking about Lagos's livability index? Last week, Friday, or 2 Fridays ago, I think, you and I had a conversation about Lagos ranking 171 out of 172 on the Economist Intelligence Unit's livability index. Lagos scored 32.2%. The only city we did better than was Damascus. Damascus is in Syria, and Syria is a war-torn country. And like I said when we started the show, aside the fact that rankings like this are a yardstick for the quality of life in the major cities of the world. So they rank all the major cities, and out of 172 of them, Lagos came 171. So apart from being a yardstick for measuring the quality of life in these cities, a lot of multinational companies, a lot of agencies use this index to set up things like hardship pay. Some countries use it while assessing, okay, well, should we set up in this particular city? Should we invest in this particular city? So you can understand why some people say, you know what, we should worry about scoring lowly on this index. I was having this conversation with someone on Twitter the other day, and the person said, you know what, at least Lagos is on the list. There are lots of cities in Africa, lots of cities in Nigeria, and they didn't make the list at all. So it doesn't matter that we're 170 1 out of 172. What matters is that we're cooking at the dining table where they're chopping the food. Yes, sure, we'll chop the bones, but we share the table. Where are the other cities in Nigeria, at least? And I want to hear what Adeshola thinks about that sentiment. I'm sure there are lots of people who are listening who probably share that sentiment. So we'll take a break, give Adeshola some time to think about that one, and then when we come back, she'll talk to us about her thoughts. And then we're also going to go we'll go to like the different categories on this index. So they talk about infrastructure, quality of public transportation. Now, Adeshola and I have touched on these things a bit in the first part of this conversation, but I want us to go a bit deeper into some of the subcategories. There's also availability of quality housing. Some people's houses are in the flood right now. Sorry, but these are all the things that make a city livable or not livable. There's also quality of water provision. So we'll take a look at all of these things when we come back from this break. I'm Sandra Ezekwesili. This is Hard Facts on 99.3.
This.
My name na Shegun and I be village man. All of una way like to blame us village people because una business they do well. Say una think say we no get our own issue. I beg you, we village people no get your time. Check yourself first.
Village people aren't the reason your business isn't growing. Introducing Money Point, a business bank that helps you realize your business dreams with easy access to quick loans, ease of payment collections, and general business management tools. Visit www.moneypoint.com and let's help you power your business dreams. Money Point, powering dreams.
Imagine a life with zero worries. Imagine a world where you're relaxed and free, where all your dreams
With
become
Page Financial, you have zero worries when it's time to pay your bills, rent, school fees, and vacation. We'll be here making it easy for you.
Visit our website www.pagefinancials.com or call 017007243. Page Financials, taking you further.
We at ShopRite are wishing all our Muslim staff and customers a happy celebration. To be part of this big celebration, we've brought lower prices on essential goods to make this year's celebration sweet and special. Buy 12 PET bottles of Pepsi, Mirinda or Team at 1,599 naira 99 kobo and different bags of rice and cooking oil. Look in store for more offers. Prices valid till the 17th of July 2022. ShopRite, lower prices you can trust always.
itel TV. It's time to enjoy better life with itel TV. Go for itel TV. Buy itel TV and enjoy itel TV. Wow, itel TV, the best for home offices and other places of different types. 19 inches, 32 inches, and 43 inches with super bright and perfect sound quality. It's durable, also affordable. This is the best time to buy all range of itel TV. Don't buy just any TV. Buy itel TV. Itel, enjoy better life.
Relax, recharge, and take a break this summer. Find the best summer holiday deals to Dubai, London, Cairo, Florida, and many other amazing cities on wakanow.com. We've got you covered. Book now on wakanow.com or visit any of our travel centers near you. Take a break. Pick a city. Wakanow. Let's go.
Hey, Alpha now. You start your day like this. Everything is going well until the unexpected happens. Then, hey, the bass boss begin. If you get our Flexi Comprehensive Motor Insurance Plan, you can save yourself yay, and the painful cost of repairing the damage to your vehicle for as low as 15,000 naira a year. If someone bashes your car, we pay to get it fixed. Visit www.hairsinsurance.com or call 0700 434 7764 to get the Hairs Flexi Motor Plan. Hairs Insurance, your simple, smart protection.
You are listening to your number one station for talk.
Your number one station for talk.
99.3 Nigeria Info. Let's talk.
How can Lagos improve its livability score? I'm referring to the Global Livability Index, published at least once a year by the Economist Intelligence Unit, EIU. And for the second year in a row, third actually, in a row, Lagos has ranked 171st out of 172 cities on the EIU's Livability Index. We scored 32.2%. And like I said before the break, apart from being a yardstick for the quality of life in the major cities of the world, multinational organizations and agencies use this index to make decisions that affect, well, those cities and the people who work for those organizations. My guest on the show today is trying to answer questions ranging from, well, what can the government do to improve the livability index, and why is Lagos scoring so low in spite of having the highest IGR of any state in Nigeria. She's a deputy editor for Stairs Business, Adeshola Afolabi. Adeshola, before the break, I mentioned that someone was having a debate with me on Twitter when I first broached this subject here on the show. And the person was like, well, Sandra, at least Lagos is in the conversation. Lagos is at the dinner table. You know, that has to count for something. What do you think about that, Adeshola?
It's funny you're laughing because I was trying to look for that conversation, but I think the question I would like to pose to that person is, how many cities in Nigeria will be regarded as the top 100 or top 50, one of the top 100 or top 50 cities in the world in the nearest future? You see, most of those cities ranked are cities that are very important to their own country's economy, their economic development. When you talk of the city or the state putting Nigeria on the global map, you see Lagos is there. It's one of the states or cities with the highest population growth, and these are some of the metrics that they use in ranking. Okay, what do we look at in terms of the future? So if you want to plan well, if you want to be properly positioned, as a top city,
as a city,
I think
not
exactly,
a city pretending, not a
city.
village pretending to be a city, but an actual city.
I know, right? I know, right? I don't think we should be thinking that, oh, we are on the table. No. Like you said, the cities that we're even being compared with, when you look at the situation in those kind of cities and you compare it with Lagos, Nigeria, you're like, okay, what now happens if you have this same kind of scenario,
the same
kind of challenges those cities have? So those are deeper questions that we need to ask ourselves. Now everything is okay, we're all right, and then we're still in this mess. So how then do we plan for a future that is way better? I think these are like eye openers. These are ways we should see them as ways to improve, not that okay, we are okay and then we are getting there. Because if you don't take this kind of metrics seriously, we just find ourselves dishing ourselves like the shorter end of the stick, or having the shorter end of the bargain. I don't think personally I think that's a myopic way of thinking about it.
Okay.
By 2050 Lagos to be like the top third city in the world, and that's like barely 30 years away from now. I think we need to plan more. We need to plan more intentionally as well. So that would be my reply.
Okay, let's talk about planning intentionally now. Let's start with infrastructure. We've touched on that a bit, but I want to talk about it as a category in the EIU Liveability Index. For infrastructure, Lagos scored a 46.4 out of 100 on that. So just shy of 50, And I want us to unpack the different subcategories that make up infrastructure on the index and see where Lagos is on each of them. That way we can talk about what could be done to improve each of those subcategories, right? So first up, you have quality of the road network. Now, this one you've talked about a bit even before the break. Obviously, this one is squarely, like you said, on government shoulders, because government plans roads, government awards contracts to build and rehabilitate the roads, government handles maintenance work directly. We all know that Lagos doesn't have enough expressways in some places, and that internal roads are very bad in other places. Now, is this purely a funding problem, or are there other dysfunctions stopping Lagos from having better roads?
Okay, so this is a very very good question. And I'll agree with you that yes, it's a funding problem, because similar to what I said, we're not in the past, we're not spending enough. But beyond funding, it's also a planning problem and an accountability problem. And I'm going to take it just based on the different categories. So you mentioned, for example, inner roads. Now, it will interest you to know that some majority of the inner roads, or let me call them local roads in across the country, not just Lagos, are supposed to be developed by the local government. So you have especially the rural roads, like in in the inner part of the city. And interestingly, I think sometime last year as well, I discovered that the institution or the government body that is supposed to provide the funding for these rural roads is actually the Ministry of Agric and Rural Development. I don't know if that is common knowledge, but they essentially get funding from the federal government to be able to fund these roads. Now, for Lagos, I think how that is supposed to play out is there's supposed to be like a channel of distribution or communication, instead that whatever local, whatever challenges a local government or a rural area has, wherever they are across the world, across the country, sorry, they table it to that ministry. But just the way, I don't know, similar to how so many things don't make sense in Nigeria, you find that some government institution what do you call these guys? People at the Senate or, House of Reps who are supposed to represent these constituencies.
Legislators?
They use them as a way, essentially, legislators. They use them as a way to get funding that are now siphoned. So if as a local government, you are not following up on like the funding that is meant to develop your own constituent, you're going to have that challenge of that funding challenge. So that's one layer of the funding challenge. Now, from the state government, they also have the responsibility to build these roads, these rural roads as well. So I'm taking it level by level. Now, I think it still falls down on whoever you appoint, because like we always say, local government is the closest closest government institution to the people. These are the people in whatever community, they know who is supposed to represent them, essentially. But you find that there's this big lag in that most people don't even know who their local government chairman is and who represents them, at the state's assemblies. Let's not talk of, federal. So I think in this area, you have this, first of all, you have this communication gap as to who is even responsible for what, who is responsible for building this road, as the rehabilitation.
Oh, we seem to have lost the connection with our guest. Hopefully she joins us back on the call. But Lagos, in the meantime, join the conversation. 0700-993-993-993. 0700-993-993-993. We've got WhatsApp too. WhatsApp is 080-959-75805. Here's this message here from Imakoko, who is in Ajegunle. He says, I think this country, okay. Well, the message you're sending to me seems to be conversation from 3 p.m. It's definitely a conversation from right now. So maybe take a look and get back to us about that. Adeshola, sorry about that break in transmission. I do hope that you have joined us again and we can keep talking. All right, so while we wait for her to reconnect, Lagos, let me remind you that we're having this conversation because the Economist Intelligence Unit's report came out, their livability index, it came out, and Lagos is 171st out of 172 cities, scoring 32.2%. And right now, Adeshola and I are talking about infrastructure as a category in the EIU Livability Index. Lagos scored, like I told you, 46.4. So now Adeshola is trying to talk to us about other dysfunctions that stop Lagos from having better roads. Adeshola, apologies about that break in transmission. Welcome back. Go ahead.
No worries. Thank you. So essentially what I was trying to explain is so I was using roads as an example, about how some, for example, legislators, they present some of these roads as projects that they want to embark on, and they get funding from like a ministry, like the agriculture and the Ministry of Agriculture and Rural Development. They get funding from that ministry because the ministry also has rural development in it. So essentially, it has the power to get funding from the federal government for development of some of these roads. So sometimes you have like the money has been released, but just because you don't even know who is responsible for what, many of those funds are siphoned. So you can look up details of that on a story I wrote sometime in the past on rural roads. But aside from that, the state government also has responsibilities. And what I'm trying to bring out here, there's this communication gap. So apart from the state even having its own faults, the citizens, the residents of, wherever they stay, they also have like the responsibility to also know who is in charge of their local government, their communities, who can they hold responsible for, many of the things that are not functioning or that are not working, in their communities. So apart from the funding problem, the communication gap, there's also the planning problem that Lagos has mentioned time and time again. So one big issue that I'm sure all Lagosians will agree with now is flooding. You know that once it rains, almost everybody is just essentially swimming in Lagos, and that's because Lagos is a coastal city. But when it comes to for example, when it comes to building cities within the city, so we have things like the Atlantic City, we have all other infrastructural development being embarked on by the state. The experts have mentioned how many of these cities have been built in such a way that it's not even sustainable for the entire state in itself. So, for example, you have where there are sand filling areas that were
waterlogged.
That were waterlogged before, and they are not providing proper channels for those waters to flow and I guess form new bodies. I think this is one of the major issue, that causes flooding, because if you're sand filling and there are no areas for these rivers or
you're not sending the water somewhere else, you're not channeling it somewhere else,
it's just going to be stagnant essentially. It's just going, and once it's even rains, the banks that are already overfilled just floods the city. So I think another thing that we need to really consider in terms of infrastructure is the planning. How are we even planning for a coastal city like Lagos when, for example, you want to build more cities? Because one of the reasons behind these cities they're building is the housing shortage. So most times you want to build like housing estates, and you have to sand fill like huge portions of areas that are usually that are like water bodies, so like little rivers, and then you just fill it with sand. It's dangerous, not just for flooding, even for the aquatic lives, that are within these water bodies. So I think those are the three major issues that I think we need to tackle in terms of the planning. How do we plan better? How do we communicate better in terms of who's responsible for what? And then how do we fund this infrastructure better? How do we spend better money? How do we spend more money? And to which area should we be spending this money?
I want to stay on that point you made about availability of quality housing, which is also something that this report mentions. Now, any Lagosian will tell you that it's a big problem area, availability of quality housing. We need lots of private investment in housing, but there are lots of problems with that. So, for example, there's lots of demand, but people who need houses can't afford the houses. Secondly, the mortgage industry isn't big enough to bring to bridge that demand. So what's a realistic way? I keep using realistic, you get why. What's a realistic way of improving the housing supply?
I know you said it gets why because we're looking for solutions that can work.
Yes, that can work, you know.
And I would be deceiving myself if I say like these things are easy to do because like you said, it's a big problem.
Right.
There are no quick fix solutions. It's hard.
Right.
And in a city as tiny as Lagos, where the landmass is not essentially there, there is that problem of how do we now build low cost housing or affordable housing that people can
I don't think Nigerians use the term affordable housing right.
affordable again, yeah, because
I don't.
I know housing is not affordable.
No.
It's not affordable. But when it comes to housing, there are several layers. And I think because it's similar to road, but just because the government handles road construction and all of that, it's a bit muted in terms of the cost of the material. So when you start from the cost and you look at the cost of basic things and how they keep going high or why the prices are high, you wonder why. So for example, you look at cement, we're self-sufficient in producing cement, yet the price of cement in the country is still one of the highest in the world. So when you look at issues like that, you look at how can we even start making it much more viable for, private sector to come in and build. I think sometime last year or early this year, we heard about Evergrande. I know that was not a very positive story. But one interesting fact about, that institution is how they built 60,000, housing units in China every single year. And then how do they get, the kind of funds to be able to build these housing facilities? Essentially, it's debt. They borrow money, and I think that was the issue of the scandal because it was even very difficult to pay the debt at the end of the day. But the point I'm trying to make is when you have the groundwork, when you have the ability to be able to attract that kind of investment as a state to say, okay, what I even want to build, what do people in Lagos need? Do we have? And then you also have issues where there are empty homes. So is the issue of housing is very multifaceted. And if we start talking about it, yes, it will take a while. So where policies can solve. So for example, creative policies in the sense of, okay, that would even eradicate the issue of empty homes. Maybe they have to be refurbished in such a way that they can now cater to the housing shortages. I don't know what kind of creative policies they'll put there. Maybe increase land use for those that are empty. I don't know. Because land use is another problem of that people complain about. Or create incentives for people to even build more larger homes. So for example, you have people that are into real estate. How does the government now encourage them or partner with them to build bigger houses or use the space when I say bigger, I mean like larger housing units. So not that you just have like big estates and then I think we just have to be realistic and conscious about the kind of solutions that can solve the housing shortage in Lagos, particularly because of the little landmass that the state has. So what could work for Lagos, for example, might not be realistic in another state like Ondo, where it's a huge state. But essentially, what I'm trying to say is, what can work realistically is still the government recognizing that there are several challenges and not just slapping maybe one solution out. You mentioned how mortgage is not even
it's not in the conversation.
In the country. I think we have just one. I think the Federal Mortgage Bank, and accessing mortgage is even very, very hard. So how do we even start looking at that aspect of financing? It's something you have to discuss and break down with financial institutions, from the central bank to even other financial institutions in the country, banks. How can we come in there and solve the finance issue? Then you now look at things from the infrastructure angle. What kind of policies do we have to put in place so that people are not even building high-rise story buildings that are not properly, that don't have proper foundation, considering the fact that Lagos is also like a coastal city. So these are some of it. I know we recently heard of the tragedy that happened in the States early this year as well. I think it was a very similar situation where a private business person was building, large volumes of offices and housing units that tragically collapsed. But then what I'm trying to say is we shouldn't also be tempted with, okay, there's no space, build high rise, but at the detriment of people's lives. We have to also be conscious of how these houses or these housing units can be built sustainably, can be built with proper monitoring as well. So I know you mentioned realistically, but it's not a walk in the park. It's a very hard problem to tackle. And as I've been saying, it to take lots of creative thinking, different dimensions.
Do you think that there's a political willingness to think creatively about the problem and a political willingness to even solve the problem? So I'll give you an example. Today on my show on the Big Three, that happens between 3 and 4, I was talking about the flooding, the flooding problem in Lagos. And I mentioned that, it's not a surprise that it rains in Lagos. It's not a surprise that Lagos is a coastal city. It's not a surprise that we are below sea level. In fact, they are talking points that supporters of, the government will use to explain away the flooding, But I gave the example of cities like Amsterdam, for instance, that is also a coastal city below sea level. And I gave an example of, this is what they did to solve this problem, So what have you noticed the government do in the last 2 years to make sure that we don't keep having these same problems? Or have we simply resigned ourselves to, we're a coastal city, we're below sea level? Which is why I'm asking you, do you see like a willingness on the part of the government to solve this problem? Do you see are they making moves that say to you, Shola, there is some creative thinking going into this? And I have a few seconds, so it's just a very short answer from you.
I mean, to be fair, this is a question that I can't even answer. I don't have the answer to. But like you rightly said, these issues are not unique to Lagos.
Yeah.
There are several cities across the world that also have similar problems. The best we can see is that the state is building its own housing units and giving its workers. I think that's the best you can see to that. But in terms of sustainable and much more long-term solutions, I think that is still lacking. And I think that's an area where we can look deeper into solving and just providing long-term solutions.
Adeshola Falabi is the deputy editor for Steers Business. She wrote an article that I honestly recommend you read. It's really good. And check them out as well, steersbusiness.com. Adeshola, thank you so much for your time today. Sorry to drag you out of your holidays.
No worries. Thank you, Sandra.
But thanks for joining us. Lagos will take a break. We'll be right back. Don't go away.
Get up in the morning, ready to conquer the day. Cause my money they grow every day with Perseo. So I step up with no stress, living the soft life. Oh yes, Perseo got my back. So when I hear the
99.3 Nigeria Info, we are more than just radio. Subscribe to our YouTube channel at Nigeria Info FM. Check us out on Facebook at Nigeria Info 99.3. Follow us on Twitter at Nigeria Info FM and on Instagram at Nigeria Info FM Lagos for live updates as it happens. 99.3 Nigeria Info. Let's talk.